Thanks for joining us for episode 8 of That's a Good Question, recording here on July 25th for episode airing Sunday, July 26th. Here we are in an election year. We're going to be voting for president in November. And we've dealt with on the podcast here with topics that are related very closely to politics. We spent a couple episodes on race relations. We talked about the Supreme Court. And with all that's going on with coronavirus and the different policies that have been instated with that, the tense state of race relations in our country, we've decided to devote at least one episode to Christians in politics and speak directly to this topic. So let's start off with talking about, there have been a couple late-breaking things happening in the news. So let's start off talking about those. How about that?
So as I was composing my weekly blog, Church Matters blog, and I would encourage you all to read that, and it was already on the issue of Christians and what the Bible teaches about Christians' responsibility to government. And I'd been writing on that this week. I was finishing it up and toward the end of the week, and there was some breaking news that was related to what I was writing on. And that is that a pastor and a church that we very much respect and we have very much promoted and will promote here at our church because we're of like mind, has made a decision that is somewhat monumental, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. It may end up going all the way to the Supreme Court again, and I'll explain what I mean by again in just a bit. But John MacArthur and Grace Community Church made a huge announcement toward the end of this week about their decision to disobey directly what the governor of California has required, that churches not meet because of the virus. And that was big news because it remains to be seen what the governor is going to do in reaction to that and where that's going to go. But it's also big news because it was quite a change, an apparent change from the stance that Pastor MacArthur and Grace Community had taken. One, going all the way back to his teaching of many, many years about submission to the government. He has been very strong about submission to the government, so much so that he has taken a stance on the American Revolution that said that the American Revolution was sinful, that it was a violation of biblical principles.
You cited a statement in your blog article about that.
And so I quoted that, and I included that because of this late-breaking news. And so I did deal with some of that. That's why I encourage you all to read this week's Church Matters blog, because it deals with some of what we're talking about here. So this was a surprise because of his past writings, and then two, earlier this year, as the virus started to spread, as the shutdowns occurred in states across the country, including California, where they're located, the church took what everyone would expect, given his past teaching, and that is, we will follow the government's requirements. And they did that. But then and that went on for a few months, May the 22nd. On May the 22nd, the president made a statement. He held a press conference. He made a statement that said, I'm paraphrasing, but churches are immediately allowed to open. I declare them to be essential and therefore can open beginning this Saturday. So that would have been 2 days. The 22nd was a Friday. And immediately, John MacArthur put out a statement that said, based on the president's statement that we are essential, that he is using the power of his office to allow us to meet, and he will override any governor who does otherwise, then we are going to meet this coming Sunday. Now, just as an aside, I say this in the blog article as well, it is not clear at all that the president has the power to do what President Trump said, but nevertheless, John MacArthur took that and said that we are going to meet. That very day, the Ninth Circuit Court met on appeal from the governor to get a ruling as to whether or not churches could override what he has said. And the Ninth Circuit said no, the governor's order is valid and churches cannot do this. Well, now, if you're Grace Community Church, you're kind of painted into a corner a bit because you said we're going to follow the president, but now a court, and we're not going to follow the governor, but now a court has said the governor's edict is valid. Now what are you going to do?
As we talked about, the court's kind of the umpire.
Yeah.
Saying what does this law mean or this.
So what are you going to follow now? And does the president trump, no pun intended, the court then, the Court of Appeals? And that very night then, Grace Community Church had to put out yet another statement. They put out another statement saying, we're not meeting then because the court has made this statement. That then resulted in many comments on the church's Facebook page from people, members of the church, saying, wait a minute, which is it? Are we submitting to the government? Are we not submitting to the government? Why are we doing it when the president says it? Why are we not doing it when the court says it? So it caused some confusion and a little bit of embarrassment, frankly. But that was all on the 22nd. And so here we are in late July now. But the church issued a statement then at the end of this week that we are going to meet, despite now what the governor has said, despite what the court has said, and not just the Ninth Circuit Court, but also the Supreme Court. Because in late May, after the Ninth Circuit on May 22nd, made that ruling, and then that was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that the governor had the authority to do this. And in an opinion written for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts gave some descriptions of things that the state of California had allowed to open that were different from churches. And that's why, he said, churches are not being discriminated against. It's not that churches are being targeted. These are things that are not alike. They're not apples to apples comparisons.
That's what you commented on. Yeah.
And I said that in the blog. So, but the church has now decided that they are being targeted. They've used that word, that churches are being targeted. I don't know that they use the word persecution, but that's the implication that churches are being persecuted, or this is the prelude to persecution. And so they're going to defy the governor as of tomorrow, starting tomorrow. So we'll see what comes of that.
Well, and that announcement that they released seemed, I struggled in following the rationale. I mean, I think I get it, but the rationale was that it's important for us to distinguish that the secular government cannot dictate how the church operates. And it sounded like they were with reference to doctrinal issues. They can't prescribe how a church is supposed to run, and so we think that this is important that we. But if that's the case, what this issue is about, it seems that they're saying then it would be wrong for us to not meet together, because as a church we determine we're supposed to meet together. It's how we operate. Yeah. But then they've been doing something wrong all this time by not meeting. That's the part that confused me, and I'm very cautious. I don't want to cast aspersions on a great church like that. Correct. But that's the part I was having difficulty following.
Well, you're not alone, and I want to follow up on what you just said. Probably just about everyone listening to us knows who John MacArthur is, knows who Grace Community Church is, and knows, if you know anything about us, you know of our great, great, great appreciation. I'm looking at our bookshelves here, and right behind Pastor Larry is John MacArthur's Systematic Theology, and we have a lot of his books here, and we promote that church and his teaching, and do so without reservation, and still do so. So I want to make that very clear. Here, it's just it's confusing, and not just confusing to you, it's confusing to a lot of people, so much so that John MacArthur and his associate, many years of associate, Phil Johnson, they were both inundated with questions about why the change here, because if churches run their own affairs, and if we're the ones who determine, then why were you doing it then? You're not doing it now. So much so that each of them issued clarifying statements then. So on the Grace Community Church website now, there is the original statement that came out at the end of the week, and then there's an addendum that seeks to explain why it was that way a few months ago and it's this way now. Folks can read that, make their own determination about it, but I have read it, and it's still not clear. And one of the, I think, fatal omissions in that explanation is an omission about Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2.
Yeah.
Because the original statement of the church, going back several months, was Romans 13 and 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 13 say that we are to submit ourselves to the governing authorities, therefore we are going to follow. Obviously, if they tell us we can't preach the gospel or we have to do something that God forbids, then we will have to obey God rather than men. But we are going to submit to the government. And cited those passages. And so here's where the confusion comes in. In the explanation that John MacArthur gave, he says, in this, I'm paraphrasing, but we were never following what the government said. We were doing what we thought was best. We were never submitting, again, that's my word, I'm paraphrasing,
right.
But we were not submitting to a government edict. Well, if that's the case, then you need to explain why you invoked Romans 13 or 1 Peter 2 to begin with. That was used in the beginning as reason that we're doing this. And I think rightly so.
Yeah.
So it's hard to back off from that now. Now, Phil Johnson, on his own blog, Pyromaniacs, the blog is what it's called, he gave an explanation. And he was very forthright in saying that, my position has evolved on this. My position has changed on this.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that very much.
And that's fair to say,
Indeed.
you admit
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that raises a larger question, I think, as to what then has led a great church and some great pastors in that direction that's kind of confusing. And in my view, we haven't had much of a chance to talk about it, so I don't want to speak for you, but I think in your view is probably mistaken. But what has led in that direction? And I'd like to talk about that just for a little bit because it might benefit some of our viewers. Since this virus has been rampant, since the shutdowns have occurred, there have been outright statements, but there's certainly been an undercurrent, and I'll just describe it that way, an undercurrent from a lot of Christian people, including a lot of pastors, and we have seen this increasingly in what Phil Johnson was saying. We've talked about this.
I've noticed that in Twitter.
And other people, like I'll mention one more person that we have a lot of respect for because he's done great apologetics work, great work on Bible translations, but James White.
Yeah.
And James White has just made a lot of statements that are very conspiratorial about what the government is doing. And if not outright statements like James White did just the other day, then an undercurrent is what I'll call it. There's been this undercurrent that there's more to this than there's a health issue and we're trying to address a health issue, but rather this is a backdoor way to try to get to churches. Now, look, you don't know what you don't know. And I could never say something for sure is not happening. All I can go on is what I see and what I do know. And having done a good bit of reading on this and read everything that these guys are talking about, I just don't see it. I don't see it. Now, it could come. It could happen that governments will use the opportunity for then overreach and to discriminate against churches and against Christians. The moment that happens, we have an obligation to do now what Grace Community Church is doing. Yeah. But not until then. So why is there that? Well, there's this view that churches are being singled out, that they're being targeted, and a lot of times comparisons are being used that are just not apt comparisons. For example, Phil Johnson has used this, the Grace Community Church Statement used this, James White has used this, another brother that I was interacting with today, someone outside of our church, using the same thing, these lists that say, it's deemed essential to have liquor stores open.
Yeah.
You've seen that,
yep.
Right? But churches are deemed non-essential. Well, if you compare those, if that's really the deal, if you've got a list somewhere that says liquor and having liquor available to people is essential, but churches are not, yeah, that's troubling.
Hey, liquor stores don't just sell liquor. They also sell lottery tickets and food. A lot of times they're grocery stores, too.
Well, I think that's what's going on. That's my understanding of what's going on. And you see that's then a slanted way of putting things. That I do not know if anyone watching this, and I mean this, if anyone has a list we are in Michigan here, I know of no such list in Michigan. I know of no such list in any state. If anyone knows of one, and I mean this, and there may be one, if there is a list where the government has said that liquor is essential during a pandemic, I would love to see it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what's happened. I think it's what you said, that food is essential. Right. And convenience stores and places that sell food may also sell beer and liquor, and those are open. But it's because they're selling food. The truth is, if it was really liquor that was the deal, why were bars closed? Why wouldn't the state have simply said, okay, you can't meet in a bar, but we're going to allow bars who normally can't do packaged liquor, we're now going to let them sell packaged liquor because liquor is so essential.
That's a really good point.
You see, but that's not the case, and yet people say that. And when you say that, you're really straining to try to make an artificial difference between how churches are being treated and how other things are being treated. And there's a lot of those. You remember here in Michigan, there was the canard about you can't sell seeds, but you can sell, other things, and why the artificial. Well, again, I don't think there's a list anywhere that says you can't sell seeds. It was the way space was divvied up in these big box stores that meant that there were areas that ended up being cordoned off.
Well, and I think it's also important to note that no one, you and I are not going to argue that mistakes can't be made in how things are doled out and what regulations are given. I mean, these people are humans like us. They're going to make mistakes. It doesn't necessarily mean they're out to get us. You know what I mean?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. Because when you say these people are human like us, yes, they're human like us, they make mistakes, and they work for the government, for heaven's sake. I mean, really, are we shocked?
We're going to edit this so that we don't get targeted.
But are we shocked that the government would mess stuff up and Absolutely. And have there been things that are really, just to be perfectly blunt, just downright stupid that have happened in our state and in other states? Absolutely. Am I surprised at that? Absolutely not. When the government does something and humans do something, but especially the government.
I never make mistakes in my job. Come on. I expect higher.
But really, bureaucracy in the government, right? Yeah, so at the beginning of this thing, you remember, at the beginning you had things that were shut down, and I still shake my head at some of the things that were shut down. Lawn care. You're outside.
Yeah.
Many of these lawn care businesses are like one guy cutting people's lawn, and that's how he makes his living. And April is a huge month for him.
Yeah.
And yet in April and most of May he's shut down. Why is that? Still doesn't make any sense to me. I'll give why I think they made that mistake in a minute, but it was wrong. It just didn't. You can't go out on your fishing boat alone, outside. Because you might stop and get gas for your motor boat, and therefore we're going to shut that down too. Okay, a lot of overreaches like that, but that's government bureaucracy. It's typical, and here's where I think the core mistake was made, and is still being made, and that is they use these categorizations of essential and non-essential.
Good point. Yeah.
And so, is your grass getting cut essential? No. Is going fishing essential? No. Is it important to people who love to fish? Is it important to the guy who runs a lawn cutting business? Yeah, absolutely. But is it essential? Essential for what? And on the Michigan governor's website, the coronavirus website, it describes what essential is. It's essential for the maintenance of physical life. So that's why you get these things called non-essential,
right?
Because they don't maintain physical life. Food does. Medical personnel do. Those who supply those things do, so you now have it, spiraling down to lots of other things. But that's where and so then churches, what list are churches going to be on?
Non-essential.
Non-essential. But non-essential does not mean not important.
Right.
But it's unfortunate wording. What they should say is things that are dangerous and things that are not. Okay?
Might change the list a little.
It would change it might, but it would also make clearer. And it would also allow the reason, and it would also allow you, if something's not dangerous, it may not be essential, but it's also not dangerous.
Right.
So let it go ahead and open. Well, now thankfully we're past that, and lawns are getting cut, and people can go out on their fishing boats. But there were certainly mistakes. Here's the thing we've got to get. Look, dumb is not necessarily nefarious. And yet there's a jump to move from that doesn't make any sense to they're doing this on purpose to target, to destroy the economy, to hurt the president. Whatever the supposed motivation may be. So getting back to churches, there has been this undercurrent among Christians and among pastors that the state is using this as a way to get to churches. Lord knows that in the history of the church and in the future and in our lifetimes, there may well be such persecution. This kind of thing could be used as a reason to do it in the future. Hey, we were able to tell you to close down before, we're telling you to close down again, and now not for very good reasons, right? Could it? Absolutely. But until it does, we don't have the right to, and I'm going to use a strong term here, but we don't have the right to slander what people are doing by imputing motives that we don't know are there.
Right.
So I have looked at it as best I can. I have looked at what our friends in California have said. I've looked at what others have said, and I do not see the targeting. I do not see the persecution. The Supreme Court does not either at this point. Could that change? Yes. If it changes, friends, Community Bible Church members, I want you to know the moment that it is clear that the state is targeting us, is singling us out for special ill treatment, then we will defy what the government says. We will obey God rather than men. But until then, as long as the state is making what can be construed as a good faith effort to try to keep the citizenry healthy, as long as that's happening, then we're going to do what I think, what Grace Community Church did at the beginning, what John MacArthur has been preaching for his whole ministry. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to then submit to the government, but we will not submit to them indefinitely, and we will not submit to them if they make clear that their intentions are otherwise. But in my considered view, that has not happened yet.
This may or may not be worth commenting on, but I'll raise the issue and see what you think here. This, I think, also evidences something that I notice is fairly common in general with people, and particularly I think in our Christian community. Maybe that's not fair in our conservative community, that we tend to gravitate toward answers that are neat and tidy and simple. And I think oftentimes oversimplified. Like you were saying, just because poor decisions were made doesn't mean they were nefarious decisions. And that is not neat and tidy. That's like, okay, so who are we saying is the bad guy? I need to know who the bad guy is.
Larry, that's a great point. That's a great point. So I'm going to say something about, again, a guy that I greatly esteem in John MacArthur. That's kind of funny, but it's to this point.
Okay.
And the funny part is that years ago, I was reading a pastor's journal called Leadership Journal. You've seen that. And Leadership Journal was known for having these kind of pastoral humor kind of cartoons in it. But they had this one page in one of their editions that was the composite of the perfect pastor. And so it had, one guy's hair. The perfect pastor would have this guy's hair, would have this guy's looks, and another guy's voice, and all of that. And they mentioned these famous preachers. And then in that composite, it was this. It had this certainty of John MacArthur. And, it's funny, but they say it because it's true. Because one of the things that's so great about John MacArthur is there's no ambiguity. It's straight up. It's absolute. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. And guys like me don't come off sounding like him. One, because I'm not him, so I'm not as smart as he is. But two, I give you that, so let's not go too far with this. Let's understand what's being said. Let's understand in its context. And that doesn't sound as good as just the straight up dogmatism. Nuance is never as attractive as dogmatism.
Well, and we, I think rightly, we're skeptical of that when it comes to doctrine. This is what God's Word says. And to be fair, though,
about it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't waffle on that.
Right.
Although there are some things that are less clear. That our dogmatism should be as firm as the clarity of the passage we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
I
so
learned
let me
that
give an example. So let me give an example about that with on this now, the whole coronavirus thing. turns out, as I was looking into the statement that our friends in California made, I looked back at what Pastor MacArthur had said a couple of months ago, going back a couple of months ago, when they were still obeying the governor, but apparently, like Phil Johnson said, evolving. That's what he said, evolving.
Yeah, yeah.
John MacArthur said a couple of months ago, this is just about a verbatim quote. He said, it's been proven that face masks don't work. Now, I don't know whether face masks work. I don't know whether they do or they don't. But here's the point, neither does John. He doesn't know that. And there's a level of dogmatism about something that you need to be really careful about. Here's another statement that Phil Johnson made. It's clear that this virus is not as dangerous as we were told. Now, what do you mean by that? Who told you? What are you talking about? I think what he's probably talking about is the early estimates that we might lose over 1 million people if we don't do anything.
Which we can't possibly know now because we've
Because
done
we did
something.
things. Not only did something unprecedented, shut down the whole country for a period of time, right?
Yeah.
And you remember back in March, we sent an email to the congregation. And in that email, we said, you know, those of us who take this seriously.
Back when we sent that,
Yeah.
we had no idea where we would be right now.
Here we are
I
in
mean,
end of
that
July.
was kind of,
That's right.
hey, this is something big that's happening.
That's right. But in it, we said that those of us who take this seriously, if we are successful in our efforts, then it will give fodder for those who are deniers.
Yeah.
Because they can say, see, this wasn't a big deal after all. Well, yeah, you can say, see, it wasn't a big deal because we shut down the country. Listen, let me just make the case to you as quickly as I can. This is a big deal, okay? This is a big deal because in 2 months, April and May, just 2 months, we lost 100,000 people in 2 months. We have lost nearly 150,000 people total, but 100,000 of those were lost in just a 2-month period. People try to compare it to the flu. Back a few months ago, actually, Pastor MacArthur used the word flu related to this. People try to do that, and we've said in emails, don't do that. That's dangerous. It's not accurate. Flu season goes 5 to 6 months every year. 5 to 6 months. On an average flu season,
It's like 60,000 or something?
37.
37, okay. Those were
Average.
big years, I'm thinking.
Big
of.
years are 60,000.
Yeah.
37,000 average for 5 or 6 months for the common flu. 2 months, we lost 100,000. Still going up. We're just under 150,000 right now, and we're still going.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can hear it, though, that the retort a lot of times when you bring that up is, well, of course, when you classify everything as a COVID-related death. So there's almost no winning when you talk
Yeah,
about
that's right.
this, though, because I feel like sometimes I've had conversations with skeptics online, and they tend to jump topics like that. That's a difficult conversation to have when you're constantly
Right.
changing topics like that. But that's one of the complaints is, well, the reporting is bad. But that works against other complaints from the same group.
Right. Because somebody says there are not as many deaths as they said. Well, how do you know that? Well, because there's a stat. And then if I use the stat to say, you know, that's way more than the common flu, well, those stats are inflated.
Right, yeah.
So on the one hand, you use it if it supports your position, and then you decry it if it doesn't support your position.
Again, back to I think this is something that I just frequently am sensing that it's oversimplification. I think it's important that we're willing to look at the situation we're in and say, this is complicated.
Yes.
And I really should have a healthy dose of humility in how I face this. And when there are a lot of experts, people whose responsibility it is to make these calls, giving information, I really need to have a lot of humility and listen.
And so we think, our church has taken, the better part of wisdom is to take a cautious approach. I'm thankful that we're able to have 3 options for people to participate in our Sunday services. Live stream, come on site, outside FM radio, come inside as of last week. Tomorrow, feel free to show up and come inside. So we now have those, but we're taking every precaution we can, not because we know, not because we know what's going to happen, but because we care. We care about the people in our church, we care about the testimony to our community, and we are not going to make claims about things that we do not know. And too many pastors, frankly, are making those kinds of claims.
Yeah, I would think, I've heard you say the same, so I know I'm pretty sure I'm speaking for both of us on this. Very thankful, too, for the congregation that we have and the good attitudes people have had about all of this, because I can sense when I talk to folks, sometimes the frustration, the uncertainty with, I don't know what to think about all of this, and in some a healthy dose of skepticism with some of the information they're getting, and yet still being, trusting that the leadership of our church is trying to make good decisions and being deferential. It's a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, I'm thankful as well. Thanks for saying that. Last thing I'll say then on this is that, so for those of you that have read what has been said, it's going viral as would be expected from a very influential pastor in a very influential church. In a short period of time, and over the next several days, it's going to get out there. If you haven't read it, I would certainly encourage you to read it, read the addendum, read our blog, and make your decisions about that. But I'm letting you know that I've read it. So you don't need to text me and say, did you see what John MacArthur said? And has that changed your view? I certainly read it. I read it with great care, and I read it with deference. To my respect for him and respect for that church. But having done so, our conclusion is what we've said here, and that we're on a good course, we believe, and we'll stay that course until the government forces otherwise. So when do you not submit to the government? Until they force you not to. That's my view, until they force me not to. The Bible says to do so, so we will do so until they make clear that we can't. Until they make clear that you are now imposing on me a requirement to violate what the Lord says for no good reason, for no valid governmental reason. When you do that, then forget about it. And so we will follow what the government says until they make clear that biblically we cannot do so.
Yeah. Well, and if you haven't watched that, or not watched, if you haven't read that post yet, I recommend go over to the blog, Church Matters blog, cbctrenton.com, and click on the blog link. It's the longest post you've made to date,
It was long.
But because of that, it's very helpful. You deal in some detail with the relevant passage of Scripture. You cite some of the relevant events and people that we've talked about today. So very good. We said that we would start with this topic. Well, we're over 30 minutes now.
Oh, wow, are we?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I think this is a two-parter.
Yeah.
People are going to get tired of us breaking. This is a good, worthwhile topic to cover, though. So come back next week if you'd like to learn about Christians and politics. But we'll close it now for today with that. And anything else you want to add?
No, thank you for that. And tomorrow at 11:30, we'll tune in next week at 11:30, as we have the first of the Christians in Politics. And I'm not sure we'll get that done in one session either, to be perfectly honest, but we'll do our best.
All right. Remember, if you don't already subscribe on YouTube, if you're watching this on our website, you can click the little CBC logo in the corner. It'll take you to our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell on that as well, and you'll get a notification, an email, or a notification in your YouTube app that we've posted something new. And then as well, follow us on Facebook, because we publish there as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.